In the beginning of the 1700s, a revolution was taking shape. The factories were rising and the smoke was pouring out. Every man, woman and child were taking part in an industrial revolution. The cotton industry transformed Oldham and Manchester from small towns to major industrial centres in Britain. In the middle of the 1700s, the economy of the towns and their surrounding rural areas relied on hatting, coal mining, but mostly the cotton and woolen trade. In 1794, there were only 12 mills in Greater Manchester. However, by 1821 this quadrupled, and by 1911 there were 246 mills. It is virtually impossible to put an exact date on the introduction of cotton to the area, but by the 1740s, Manchester merchants were distributing cotton and using the process of roving, spinning and weaving.
My name's Carole and I'm a presenter here at the museum. I started work at 15 when I left school. There was a hierarchy in the factory even then, and I started work sweeping the floor in what's called the ring spinning. And then they asked me if I'd like to train to become what's called the doffer, which was taking off the full bobbins on the machine and replacing them with empty ones. You'd work your way round the team, you know, number 4, number 3, number 2 to top doffer. And then when they needed spinners, they would take for training, and then you'd get a set of ring frames and become a spinner. I went on further than that, and when I finished the industry, I was working in there for 28 years. I was a training officer for a company called Holt. Unfortunately, they closed down in this country, and I was lucky to get the job here.
Another key influence during the cotton trade was James Watts. He was Mayor of Manchester in 1855 to 1857, and he founded SMJ Watts Limited and built the Watts Warehouse on Portland Street. This opened in 1856 as a textiles warehouse for the wholesale drapery business and was the largest single occupancy warehouse in Manchester. In the 1980s, the building underwent a conversion, and in May 1982, the Britannia Hotel opened.
Yeah, my name is Adam Daber and I'm Curator of Industry. Lincoln, as you know, was President of the US from 1860 until he was assassinated in 1865. One of the things that he wanted to tackle when he came into power was to address the issue of slavery in the States. The States were some time behind Britain because Britain's first act to abolish British ships taking slaves was 1808. And then in 1838 it was abolished throughout the whole of the British Empire. So America was playing a system of catch-up. But the southern states of America were one of the major suppliers of cotton to the Lancashire cotton industry. And he realised that to be able to address the slavery issue as a problem, he would have to tackle that, and he would have to do something about it. So he took an interest in that sort of issue and brought in his act, I think, 1862 or thereabouts. You'll have to check the dates. The first real act that involved children was the 1802 Health and Morals of Apprentices Act. It's fair to say that in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, and most people accept that started sometime in the 1770s and 1780s, the two major industries were coal mining and cotton industry, so people naturally focused their attentions on those. The 1802 Act was the first attempt at legislation, and it began to look at the conditions of the child workforce because they were the ones that were most open to abuse and caused most social concern. There was then a subsequent act in 1819, the first of the real factory acts, and gradually as these acts went through, there was another one in 1833, 1840s, 1860s, 70s and so on. The scope of the interest expanded, and the conditions that they began to impose were better, so they began to look at providing the kids with education, limiting the number of hours, firstly for children and then for women and children, and eventually for the whole of the workforce. By the time you get into the 80s, they begin to look at health provision in general and all sorts of welfare issues and things, and through into the 20th century we begin to get eventually paid holidays and things like that. So it's progressive.
Well, obviously money. I mean, cotton goods from Manchester, produced in Manchester, were sold all over the world. Yeah, it did make an awful lot of money for the city. It made the city the fantastic place it is today.
Were there any negative effects of the cotton industry?
An awful lot. Obviously working conditions, depending on where you worked in the factory, you could have a very dusty, damaging atmosphere, so lung disease would be rife. Machinery accidents, of course, were no health and safety to speak of, no guarding on the machines, especially when children worked in factories. Children as young as 5 sometimes. Living conditions, again, appalling. Lots of people moving into the city. Hastily erected houses. Things like cholera were rife because there's no proper sanitation. Without a doubt. At one time, I believe it took, when they first built the canals, I believe it took as long for the cotton bales to come down the canal into the city as it did for it to come all the way from America by ship. So the canals were a big improvement, but also the railways afterwards were a fantastic improvement. Again, that was lots of different things. I mean, we had like the World Wars, World War I, World War II, whereas again the cotton bales couldn't get here. We had foreign competition. We tended to be a bit slow in this country with the technology. When new technology would come out, we tended to stick more to the old technology, whereas other countries went with the new technology. Also, one of the things was where we had the climate before to process the cotton through the machinery, we had the humidity. Now in countries, say like Pakistan, where it's, and Egypt especially, where it's very hot and they grow cotton, they can also make it, they have the technology to make a climate in the factory. So I suppose in a way it makes sense to process it where you grow it. So lots of things actually made the downfall of the cotton industry.